Good morning. Good morning. I'd like to welcome everyone to this legislative breakfast brought to you this year by Vermont's North Country Chamber of Commerce. And we don't seem to have a representative of the Chamber of Commerce here. But in any event, in behalf of the Chamber, I'd like to welcome everyone this morning. Again, Dan Pellerin is the member of the Chamber, who's the vice chair, who usually attends these breakfasts. And if there is anyone here who does not receive email notification of the breakfast, please give me your email address before leaving today. I will pass it on to Dan, and if he shows up a little late this morning because he overslept, just remember to rub it in, so it's made it here on time. But in any event, give me your email address and I'll make sure that you are added to the list. This year has been the case for many years now. Coffee, juice, and a light breakfast are available at a charge of $5 per person. We again appreciate the hospitality extended to us by the management and staff here at the Eastside Restaurant. This morning, Todd Carano is videotaping the proceedings for later broadcast on Channel 15, the local PEG Access channel. And if I am correct, today's proceedings will be broadcast tonight at 8 p.m. as well as on Wednesday at 9 a.m. And in addition, we're pleased to have the print media represented again this morning by Robin Smith from The Record and Chris Roy from the Newport Daily Express. Thank you, Todd, Robin, and Chris. At each breakfast this year, we'll have one senator and two representatives as our special guests. The senator and representatives are each given an opportunity to make 10 to 15-minute presentations as to what is going on in Montpelier this year and their observations for the remainder of the session. We then open the floor to questions and comments directed to the featured legislators. And anyone who is asking questions or making comments is asked to come up and stand where I'm standing and tell us who you are and where you are from. And in addition, as soon as we open it up to questions and comments, we ask that you stand in this area so that you're in line to be heard. Often what happens is nobody wants to be first, and we have trouble getting people to start things off, but then there are several people who then want to speak, and we just have to shut it off at 8:45, which is our adjournment time. And you know, it's amazing how legislators can make the timing such that everyone appears right on time. We were a little worried here because at the commencement of the ceremony we only had one representative, but all three legislators had appeared. And we certainly appreciate their participation. Again, I remind everyone that while there's an awful lot that's going on in the world and in our communities, it's important that we focus on, at this breakfast, on the issues that are facing the legislature of the state of Vermont, or which you believe should be faced by the legislators this year. We're pleased this morning to have as our special guests Senator John Rogers and Representatives Sam Young and Mark Higley. Senator Rogers serves as Vice Chair of the Senate Committee on Institutions and is a member of the Senate Committee on Natural Resources and Energy. John, please tell us what's happening in the Senate and your perspective as to what will be happening.
Thank you, Bill. Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for coming out. We know that we can run just a little
bit late because Bill has such a great monologue every opening. We know we've got a little bit of extra time, so, and I'm going to apologize ahead of time because I'm going to leave here fashionably early to get to my next meeting fashionably late as well. We do kind of hop around at this time of year. Thanks everybody for coming out. So in my Natural Resources and Energy Committee, we've been doing a fair amount of work on various toxins and pollutants, as well as some clean water work, trying to figure out how to work better with folks such as the watershed groups in various areas, and NVDA and other groups that are on the ground and know their communities well, and figuring out how to connect them to the money we have to help clean up Vermont's waterways. It's way better when we work with local partners than it is when the state comes in and tries to figure out what to do from the top down. So I think we're making progress there. We did just pass a bill out of my committee that will ban single-use plastic bags and straws and the styrofoam carry-out clamshells and such that you get at fast food places by 2020. These things are polluting our environment, and what happens with a lot of them, especially the styrofoam, it's very easy for it to break up into little pieces. It ends up in the waterways, it ends up in the soils, and even the single-use plastic bags over time break up into little pieces, but they never really go away. And so what happens is we end up with a bunch of microplastics in our soils, in our waterways. They're showing up in all various aquatic life. They're showing up in all different types of our seafood and the things that we eat. And as you might guess, microplastics are not really that healthy to be eating. And so we're hoping to make some progress on that. I did make a joke in the committee that I'll share with you, because they told us that the plastic bags in the landfill last approximately 1,000 years, and so I asked if anybody could tell me, does that mean that everybody that's walking around picking up their dog poop in a plastic bag has now preserved it for 1,000 years? And nobody could quite answer it. So in Senate institutions, we're waiting for the House to get the bill over to us, but we've been going through the Capitol bill and have done a fair amount of testimony on various things. We've got some pretty big outstanding problems with state infrastructure. Woodside, which is our facility for juvenile delinquents, juvenile offenders, whatever you want to call them, is outdated and does not serve the programmatic needs of both our youth offenders or the state. And so we're trying to figure out what to do with that facility. It really needs to be replaced, but as with any new facility, the price tag's very high, so we're trying to work through that. We have a similar problem with our state correctional facilities. Many of the older facilities have a ton of deferred maintenance, big price tag. There is still talk about pursuing the idea of one larger facility over in the St. Albans area, where we actually own a piece of land that it could go on. And that facility, if it ever comes to fruition, would be set up in a manner where it would be sort of like a campus, where there would be different satellite buildings serving different purposes. Everybody knows we've got a lot of drug issues, and those drug issues show up in corrections. We have a bunch of folks in corrections that are aging and sickly and need a lot of medical care. We need facilities to run programs for the folks who are going to get back out in the community, and we hope to be able to rehabilitate them and turn them into productive citizens when they get out. So it's, I think it's a great plan, but it comes with an extremely large price tag. So we've been working through that as well. One of the things that I've been working on, I'm not sure how many of you heard that the governor proposed to close the Salisbury Fish Hatchery, which produces about 20% of the broodstock trout that we stock in our lakes, ponds, rivers, streams. I think this governor has been the worst governor ever in the history of Vermont for gun rights and sportsmen's issues. Governor Shumlin would have never signed the gun bill that Phil Scott signed, and Governor Shumlin would have never proposed to close this fish hatchery. It's just, it's short-sighted because that fish hatchery, it does cost a fair amount to run it, but the anglers who come here from out of state and the Vermonters who fish here spend a huge amount of money. And if they can't catch fish when they go fishing in one of those lakes or streams, they're going to stop spending that money. So I think it's very short-sighted, and I think the legislature has figured out a means to keep it open, working with the Commissioner of Fish and Wildlife. There are going to be slight fee increases on licenses. But the sportsmen that we have talked with all said they would rather pay an extra $50 on their license than to see that facility closed. So I'm in hopes that we've figured out a way forward and a way to keep that going. Also have been doing a bunch of work on the hemp industry, and with the 2018 Farm Bill and the feds taking hemp off the scheduled list finally for something that never should have been on it. It's sort of presenting us with some new problems that we didn't have under the 2014 Farm Bill in the pilot program. The USDA has not yet come up with their policies and rules around it, so there are still a bunch of federal dollars, like through Yankee Farm Credit, VITA, and some of the other agencies that are connected to federal money, that still can't lend money to hemp businesses. Some of the banks are now actually on board and lending. Some of them are still waiting for the USDA to develop those rules. And I've been speaking with folks at VITA, and they say that money could, the rules and policies could be done in 2 weeks, or as the federal government sometimes moves, it could be much longer. So we're hoping that they get that straightened out. There are also some issues with the FDA. So we as a state are number one, trying to build a program. We're going to try to get a couple more people in the ag agency, one to run the new lab down in Randolph. So we will have a modern testing lab that can make sure everybody's in compliance and test for pesticides and things that shouldn't be in the hemp as well. We're hoping to put one person on in the field to go out and inspect farmers' fields and processing plants and make sure they're doing what they're supposed to do. And we're hoping to put one person on for a seed certification program. As we speak, there's millions of dollars flowing out of Vermont, out west, where all the seeds are produced. And so most everybody that I know that's growing hemp in the state of Vermont is buying Western seed, and it's quite pricey. So I think that would be a huge economic advantage to Vermont if we can set up a seed certification program and start growing that seed here and keeping that, not only keeping that money in Vermont, but also hopefully we'll be able to start selling that seed to other states and bring money for that hemp seed back into the state of Vermont. So that's a few things that I've been after so far, and I'm going to sit and listen to the representatives, and we'll be happy to take questions until I bug out at about 8:30. Thank you.
Thank you, John. And now from the House side, I'd like to welcome Representative Sam Young. Sam this year serves as a member of the House Committee on Ways and Means. Sam?
Good morning, everyone. A couple of changes for me this year. I'm now the member from Greensboro. I started out as the member from Albany, and then I spent 7 years in Glover, and now I'm in Greensboro. And if I get a few more years, I'll probably live in every town in the district. And then also, formerly I was the vice chair of the Ways and Means Committee. I've stepped down from that role, and I'm just a member of that committee. But interestingly, it's actually giving me a better position to kind of advocate for the policies that I feel are important, and I've actually been, I feel, honestly more effective this year at doing that. So far we've put up two kind of bigger bills. One is kind of a miscellaneous tax bill that doesn't really have any money in it. It's kind of like with every year the administration brings us a number of tax changes that they would like to see happen that maybe have been brought through the taxpayer advocate's office. Different issues that need to be resolved. One of them was around like widows and widowers, and if your partner dies and you aren't on the deed, that if you were likely to inherit the property, that you would still be eligible for your property tax adjustment, or if in cases of where there's a restraining order and you're a victim of domestic violence, you don't need to go and get your spouse's income in order to get your property tax adjustment. And so that was a bill that I reported on Friday, and it also just, it had passed out of the committee 11-0. We voted out the fee bill on Friday, also with unanimous support, both parties in the committee. One of the things that, it's interesting, the fee bill, normally we do it on a 3-year cycle so that you look at each agency in government every 3 years and see if, the fees represent what is needed to support the services that they provide. An interesting example is what John talked about was in the Fish and Wildlife Department. We ended up not necessarily going with the governor's proposal in order to raise enough, raising an additional $150,000 off of the governor's proposal in order to save the Salisbury fish hatchery. That's not quite enough to do it, but the rest of it will hopefully come in through the budget process. And also, there was, you don't look at the last couple of years, we haven't had a fee bill, so the Public Utility Commission and the Public Service Department came in, and over the last 2 years, they've been running at a $600,000 deficit, and those two agencies are funded by a gross receipts tax on utility, basically the utilities, so they're supported by the regulated utilities. We ended up coming up with a proposal, at least so that they are fully funded for this year, and they will take from the reserves from the Utility Commission in order to pay back their deficits for the last couple of years. But it's an interesting example of where we're kind of like victims of our own success. We've done so good on efficiency that the power companies are selling less power, so there's not enough money to fund the departments to regulate them. So we ended up doing a slight increase on the gross receipts tax in order to fund those departments. The House will get out the budget and the tax bill this week. And honestly, I think that the legislature and the governor are working together this year a lot better in terms of the budgeting process. There wasn't any kind of fight set up right from the beginning. And I'd say that the differences are generally pretty small. The governor wanted $8 million for clean water. It looks like the legislature is looking at 10. He had a thing set up where he would take it from the estate tax. We're talking about doing it from a little bit like dedicating some revenue from the existing rooms and meals tax. And kind of an example of, I'd say, the legislature and the governor working together. Well, his staff is showing up to committees now. That's nice. And they're also even eating with us in the cafeteria. So like there's a little bit more dialogue between the two branches of government. And I think it's really important because, we need to function for, and have communication with each other in order to kind of bring proposals forward that fund and help government operate. One of the bills that just came to my committee is around an individual mandate around healthcare in the Tax Cut and Jobs Acts from the Trump administration. Last year, they zeroed out the individual mandate for a fee that would require you to get health care, or if you don't have health insurance, you have to pay a fine. Honestly, the proposal that the healthcare committee put out was, well, they adopted the wisdom of Congress. They used the same formula that they had to put out, but it's just incredibly complicated, and honestly, it just sets up a fight with the governor that we don't need. And I think if I have any ability to sway my committee, we won't have that part of the bill at all. And then we also just got a bill on broadband that would raise $1.6 million a year to help continue to try and build out broadband, but also to try to provide some support for communities that are creating communications union districts. And I'm sure that we will pass that again, but we've passed it the last two bienniums. It hasn't been ever taken up by the Senate. So, you know, sometimes it just feels like, you know, going around in circles, but, you know, you still got to put the ideas forward in order to hopefully make progress. And that's all I have for right now, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Sam. And now I'd like to welcome Representative Mark Higley. Mark serves as a member of the House Committee on Energy and Technology. Mark?
Thank you, Bill, and thank you everyone for showing today. Glad John and Sam showed up because I had laryngitis right after my town meetings and just got my voice back, so I don't think I could have talked for 45 minutes, but there was a politician without his voice, I mean, come on. Anyway, in the House, well, you maybe have heard that there's now over 1,000 bills have been introduced. I believe it was 5 years ago I introduced a resolution. It had to be a resolution because it goes to the Rules Committee in regards to that process. And right now, 29 other states have either in one chamber or the other limitation on the number of bills that can be introduced. And it really doesn't limit you in a sense because what I proposed was what some other states proposed was you can introduce an unlimited number of bills up until the start of the session, and then after the start of the session, you're allowed 5. And then that doesn't include short-form bills. It doesn't include charter changes after town meetings. There's other ability for you to get a bill introduced. Like if I had my 5, I could ask Sam to sponsor, be the lead sponsor on the others. You know, the concern is, you know, there's one rep that has over 90 bills introduced. And it is taking a toll on our production down there, or lack thereof, however you want to look at it. But one example would be in General Housing and Military Affairs, they came out early on with a paid family leave bill. The governor's bill was basically delayed because of the backlog in Ledge Council. So there wasn't really, some people in the General Housing and Military Affairs Committee wanted that bill to come out simultaneously so they could take a look at them, each in committee, and see how it looks. So now that's going to be a little different process. There's some other examples I could give, but it's interesting to me because the speaker came out the other day on the floor and said, geez, we got this problem. Anybody that's got some ideas, please let me know. I haven't heard anything from the Rules Committee on this yet, so I'm hoping that that's going to be considered. So that's one of the things that I've been working on. Sam mentioned out of our committee, Energy and Technology, we produced a broadband bill. Again, it's a bill to try to help out in connecting up that last mile of fiber or whatever to get these towns on board. It's an economic issue for a lot of folks in a lot of rural communities in particular. There's some these CUDs that Sam mentioned, communication union districts. can be set up with multiple towns, similar to like a water district. The only thing is they won't be able to use money through taxation through the town. It has to be based on, you know, their up and running fiber project, whatever it is. A little bit of a concern there with money being offered through VITA. There is, you know, they're looking at some of these projects possibly not making it and looking at a loss there. But it is an attempt. The Universal Service Fund is going up 0.5%. It's now 2% on your phone bills for Vermont. That's looking at going up another 0.5% to help go towards some of that. We just heard Friday from it's really through the Transportation Department, but we had a piece in it that we had been talking about, and that's the electric vehicle incentive program. So what's come out of transportation as of Friday is there's that $1.5 million from the VW settlement that the governor has proposed to put into the electric vehicle incentive program. You're going to qualify for a $2,500 rebate or program if you are 100 to 140% of the median household income. And that median household income right now is about $57,500, and so anywhere from that up to $80,500 you qualify. Anything under that, you would qualify for a $5,000 prebate on an electric vehicle. That's an all-electric vehicle. Or there's a lease program as well. Trying to get, I guess, a number of vehicles out there. You know, through the Comprehensive Energy Plan, they're looking at having 50,000 electric vehicles in Vermont by 2025. We only have about 3,000 right now. This is something that's all new to me. Again, being on the Energy and Technology Committee, I'm just learning about electric vehicles. I'm finding out that they're a little pricey, anywhere from $35,000 to, you know, the fancy ones up to $95,000, $100,000. The range is pretty broad. Some of them are 110 miles on a charge. I think the new Bolt now, Chevy Bolt, goes up to 225 miles. Concern, especially in this area, if you ask me, is when you get extreme cold temperatures, that drops that about 40% off the mileage that you can run. There's another thing that folks have to realize, and that's that there's about $1,000 to $1,500 charge for installation for your charging station at your house. The ones that they're setting up around that you might see in towns or whatever, those are in the neighborhood of $7,000 to $8,000 to set up. And then there's even a more expensive one. It's called a Tier 3, which is a very fast charger, and those are even more expensive than that. So I think this program is, it'll be interesting to see how it works out, how many people do take advantage of it. I think, you know, our committee was actually looking for a lot more of that money to be used for this, but I think it's important to start out relatively small on a program like this to see what the bumps in the road are. So that's what came out of the Transportation Committee in their bill on Friday, and we took a look at that. I guess there's just a few other bills of concern to me. Some of them, you look at these bills sometimes and you say, well, that'll never go anywhere, it'll stay on the wall. But one that was taken down off the wall in government operations the other day was allowing 16 and 17-year-olds to vote in municipalities. I think that's a real concern for anybody as far as we're all over the place with that. Last year during the gun debate, of course, they required that you're 21 years of age to purchase now from 18. They're looking at raising the age of smoking to 21. It just doesn't jive to me. Again, if you can serve in the military, if you can vote at 18, there's got to be some. I mean, the argument during the gun legislation last year was, you know, the developing mind hasn't matured enough at 18, so that's why they moved it up to 21. Again, on the gun control side, you know, that's over in the Senate right now. Pretty concerning. They had a big public hearing down in Randolph. My concern there is, you know, they talk about compromise. I remember last year at the end of the debate on the floor, members got up and said, well, this is a good start. And that's what happens all the time, is they come back with more and more. And when they talk about compromise, they start out with a whole menagerie of gun control legislation, drop it back and say that that's the compromise. And my concern is what's coming over, if and when it comes over from the Senate, is you never know what the House is going to do with adding to it. I guess if I've got a couple more minutes, I'd like to talk a little bit about, there's an expungement bill that's coming out. It was supposed to come out Friday. They pulled it back. I can't remember just why, but so it's looking at expunging misdemeanors and some felonies, so that it's like an economic development bill supposedly, where you can get these folks back to work and so on. I understand some of it. I don't understand why they didn't look at DWI in that as well. My other concern about that is things like, I believe that on the Senate side, they're looking at, again, registering home improvement contractors. And again, registration through the Secretary of State's office is a form of licensure which requires you to be current in all federal and state taxes and child support payments, you name it. So again, here on one hand, we're trying to get people back to work by expunging their records for misdemeanors and felonies, yet we're looking to put more roadblocks on somebody who wants to, whether it's wash windows for a business or be a home improvement contractor, throwing up more roadblocks for them to start a business. So there's a lot more being considered down there. In energy and technology, again, you might have heard the speaker say that there isn't time to take up a carbon tax bill, but there's plenty of carbon tax bills on our wall. We did actually take testimony Friday on H477 and had a bunch of students come in and who were protesters taking time off from school to come to the State House, and we did listen to some of their testimony on H477. So I guess with that, I'll end and answer any questions that folks have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. And now we're at the point in the program where we open the floor to questions and comments from you, the citizens of Williams County. Again, we ask that you keep your questions or comments directed to issues that are or you think should be addressed by the legislature this session. Recognize there are a lot of national and local issues that we'd all like to talk about, but again, the purpose of these breakfasts is to focus on the Vermont legislature. Again, we ask that you come up in this general area, and when it's your turn, tell us who you are, where you are from, and if your question or comment is directed to just one of the featured legislators, tell us. Otherwise, we'll assume that your questions and comments are directed to all of the legislators. So who would like to start things off? Don't tell me it's going to be one of these mornings where we can't get anyone to get started, but then there are people that want to speak that don't have a shot. And we do have a volunteer.
Good morning, Paul DeSell from Newport. I'll start by talking about thanking Senator John Rogers. He and I don't always agree on everything, for his recent vote on the minimum wage bill that came before the Senate. I've been an employer since I was 22 years old, and the idea that the legislature, folks who mostly sign the back of the check, are going to make regulations for those of us who sign the front is kind of offensive to me. I don't dispute that people deserve 15 or 20 or $25 an hour for their hard labor. But the reality is that there's not always economic value in a job. There's not $15 worth of economic value for that employer. The legislators seem to forget that when the $15 minimum wage, or when any wage increases, the costs associated with it, like the FICA tax, the unemployment tax, the workman's compensation premiums increase. It's inflationary in our businesses, and business is hard in the first place. If it was easy, and again, I think that's an assumption that the legislature makes, is all businesses are wildly successful and that the proprietors are drowning in their profits. 1 in 3 businesses fails within 5 years. The higher minimum wage increases risk, which we already have from competitors, from technology, from other threats to our industries that we happen to be in. Talk to someone about a video store 20 years ago, right? There's no guarantee of business success in an ongoing way. I think a higher minimum wage, the legislature adds difficulty and adds competition and adds risk to business owners who put up their own money and risk their time, pardon me, to be successful. And it's just extremely difficult in the marketplace. A statewide minimum wage doesn't consider the different market conditions in different counties or different regions of the state where business is harder in different places. So while you can legislate a minimum wage, you can't legislate that the business owner has the capital to make those wages a reality. So one of 3 things is going to happen. The employer is going to take those wages off of their bottom line, off of their profits, reducing the value of their business, because if you ever try to sell a business, the first question you get is, how much money did you make last year? If my profits are lower, the value of my business is decreased, that's not sustainable. The job will be outsourced, it'll be taken over by technology, or it will just go away. And any of those outcomes, in my view, are a negative. So, John, thank you for your vote. I'd ask the 2 representatives what the likely fate of the minimum wage bill is in the House.
Thank you, Paul. And for those of you who participated in the last breakfast, just remind you that the last breakfast was indeed sponsored by Paul, and I think it's appropriate to give a round of applause to him at this breakfast so that he can hear it rather than one where he wasn't able to hear it. John.
If I'd known Paul was buying, I might have come to the last. Yeah, so there's a lot of factors that go into it, and like Paul alluded to, I think most people should get paid 15 bucks an hour. But as far as I'm concerned, the bill, first off, is poorly crafted. If you pay somebody $12 an hour and they got full benefits, you are still going to have to raise that person up to $15 an hour. While the guy down the street paying $12 an hour with no benefits would raise that one to $15 an hour. It just didn't seem fair. The second thing that we have going against us, as many people from this area know, a huge number of Vermonters go to New Hampshire to shop. The Connecticut River Valley is hurting. New Hampshire's crushing us. New Hampshire continues to grow. Our side of the river continues to shrink. It would be a further impediment to businesses down the White River Valley. It really is a bit of a tough decision for me, because I know most people out there should be getting paid 15 bucks an hour. But as Paul said, there are some businesses that I've talked to that say, okay, I get this person in, I train them up for 2 weeks, and then they never show up again. No explanation, no phone call. Just talking with the folks from JP last week, and they said that happens to them all the time. Person just among the missing. So that type of person, when you're training them, when they haven't proven themselves, I don't think they necessarily should be paid $15 an hour. And then you've got your kids who work in the summer. Training a kid to do something that they've never done, giving them that job experience. Should you have to pay them $15 an hour? So it's sort of a blunt instrument trying to address a very complex problem, and that's why I voted against it. I couldn't support the bluntness of the bill.
Sam?
I think that the simple answer to what you asked is, yeah, the House will pass it. I didn't support it last year, but the governor will veto it, and there won't be the votes to override the veto. So it'll be a replay of last year. And kind of, I agree with John, just, you know, my partner runs the Highland Lodge, and we hire a lot of high school kids in the summertime, and, you know, a $15 minimum. Now, to be fair, $15 in 2024 is not the same as $15 tomorrow, and the value of money devalues every year. So I don't support $15 because I feel like it's just like this bumper sticker slogan that we're trying to get to. And when if the bill happens, I'm sure we'll review it in my committee, and you know, I think that you should actually look at the economics of something, and, you know, does it make sense? Like, just the random $15 an hour doesn't make economic sense. Maybe there should be a slight bump up to, you know, could I support 11, 12, I don't know, but like, I'm gonna look at those numbers and see if they make sense. But the truth of the matter is, the governor's gonna veto it. It's not, the House isn't gonna override the veto.
And Mark?
Thank you. I didn't support it last time that it came before the legislature as well on the House side. Some of my arguments were, again, an individual that is my neighbor, worked for 18 years down in Stowe at a restaurant. He was one of the line cooks, making $18.50 an hour. If this all turned around in such a short period of time where you were paying dishwashers for $15 an hour, I mean, you're going to have to raise his income by a substantial amount. So that dinner plate that cost you $12.50 for a hamburger is going to be out of price for a lot of folks. Another example that I use is my North Troy Main Street store. Told me for years, Mark, keep it up, again with paid sick leave. Now, of course, you know, there's piggyback on top of not just a $12 an hour minimum wage, but paid family leave that's looked like it's coming out there as well. But again, the owner told me that keep it up and I'll be closing my doors. I just can't afford it. Sure enough, you know, a couple of years ago, we did close both his North Troy store and his Richford store, and now there's just a Dollar General there. You may have heard, again, it was, as John had mentioned, along the Connecticut River Valley. I think it was a Barnett store that just went out. You might have heard about over in Moncton. There's a store that was going to close its doors because of some back taxes owed to the state. You know, people started flooding in and buying their chocolates and other things. And an interesting story is one of my local stores put that out on, I don't know if it was their Facebook page or whatever, and people thought they were talking about her store, so they came down and started to offer money, you know, right during the day to keep the store open. And I hear from them all the time. Those are the ones, for whatever reason, really touch base with me as far as these mandates that are coming out from the state that are going to make them close their doors. So I'm not supportive of it, and again, it's when it's piggybacked on to all the other mandates that we throw at small businesses down in Montpelier.
Next question or comment? Mr. Greenwood.
Just a note on the minimum wage. Chet Greenwood from Derby. Just a note on the minimum wage. I know several manufacturers in the area have had to increase their starting wage 2 or 3 times in the last 2 years. It's done by pressure, not by mandated. then that's the way it should work. I'd like to address this to John, Senator Rogers. It's S37, it's the groundwater protection rule, and this is one that you don't probably read about too much in the paper, but this is one that could put businesses, manufacturers especially, out of business, or keep new manufacturers from coming in to the state. And it's the restrictions that are applied to the chemicals on the ground, and it goes back to the Bennington, where all the wells were polluted 2 or 3 years ago in the town. And it was an awful thing. And the groundwater protection rule, we agree that it should be monitored. But S37 is a little bit of an overkill. It's requiring manufacturers to regulate chemicals that do not even have a government standard for them. And I have to read some of the regulations because they're technical. The proposed regulations do not set clear or reasonable limits that are linked to any established state or federal environmental standards. The proposed regulations would extend to chemicals not currently regulated by federal environmental law. The proposed regulations involve arbitrary and capricious standards, such as setting a level of contamination for which there currently is no known analytical testing capabilities. The standards would essentially apply retroactively and result in the unraveling of current standards for the previously remediated properties. These are the toxic fund where they cleaned up all these properties. Now they can go back and reopen them if to test for chemicals that currently don't even have standards for. So I think they would establish reserves to cover potential remediation costs. Now, in some cases, that would require a company to have insurance for potentially a chemical that they don't even know there's no standards for it. But 2 years from now, it might be ruled that it's toxic. So it's a little bit of overkill, and no business is going to come in, and I don't care what business you have, it's not just manufacturers that use chemicals. Almost every business uses chemicals. Your filling stations, your garages, your motel, cleaning supplies, anything that has a chemical like that, you're going to have to report it. So it's a little bit of, okay, I don't know where that bill stands. I think it's out of committee, but could you fill me in? Thank you.
Senator Rogers.
Thank you, Chad. Yeah, I did. That has passed the Senate now, and I did support it. And I do have some concerns with it going too far. But any manufacturer who's using chemicals who have not been evaluated or don't have a level yet, I'd be happy to pour you glassfuls of them and see how many of them you want to drink and not be concerned. I think that bill goes a little too far. I think before it's through the process, it'll get ratcheted back some. What we're saying is people need to be held accountable for putting chemicals that don't belong in the environment that affect other people. There are so many chemicals out there now, and like you said, there's a whole bunch of them that don't have standards. That doesn't mean they're not dangerous. And when they escape or they're handled improperly and they end up in the surface water or somebody's drinking water or the soil, they impact people's health. And that's really what the bill is trying to do, is saying if you're handling these chemicals, if you're creating these chemicals and you're not handling them properly, that you're going to be liable. So I hope the bill continues to get a little bit more work done on it, because I think it does go a bit over the top, but at the same time, I'm extremely concerned about all the chemicals that are being released into our environment today. And I'll give you one more example. The leachate or sludge, whatever you call it, that comes out of the landfill now and goes into this wastewater treatment facility and several others around the state. There's certain things they test for, and there's certain things they don't test for. So the effluent that's coming out the pipe and going into this lake that's supposed to be clean water, well, they know the levels of all the chemicals that they test for. They don't know all the levels of the chemicals they don't test for. Then, last I knew, and I'm not sure if they're still doing it, but a lot of these facilities also land applied the sludge out of the facilities at the end. Same thing. They're testing that for certain chemicals. They're not testing it for all chemicals. So that sludge very likely contains high levels of really nasty stuff that we're not testing for, and they're putting it on soil, largely farmland. That goes into feed, that goes into cows. Cows make milk. We don't know what's being passed on to us through our food chain, what's being released in the water, what's being applied to the soil. I think everybody should be concerned about it, and I think we need to do a better job at controlling those chemicals.
Tim?
So, I mean, clearly that's a Senate bill. It hasn't got over to us. I haven't looked at it, and I really just don't have much to comment about it. Sorry.
Mark?
The only thing that I've really heard about it is in discussion in the hall. There are some bigger companies out there that it sounds like it is a threat to them. One is Global Foundries. I haven't seen the bill. I'm not sure all its ins and outs. I did read another piece that is talking about even the chemicals involved in just window cleaning solutions. Again, it all depends on what the bill looks like and where the liability lies. I think it sounds like it could be a real concern for keeping and attracting businesses. We have to be responsible, or the businesses do, for the products they use. But again, if we put an undue burden on them that other states don't have, it's just one more nail in the coffin to try to attract business to Vermont.
Janine Young?
Janine Young, Craftsbury Common. I had something else I wanted to do, but since the single-use plastic came up in the previous discussion, I thought I would center on that. One of the biggest single-use plastic problems I think we have is what the farmers use to roll up their bales. That stuff is everywhere. You know, that makes a big mess all over. How is that bill going to impact farmers? Very little single-use plastic comes into my house because it's used for something else. You know, the old Vermonter, make it, use it up, wear it out, make it do or do without. And I use things all over. I don't know how a plastic bag can last in the landfill for 1,000 years. It won't even get your groceries from the trunk to the house. But I think that's something that is not worthy of the legislative time at this point, because you put it in the landfill, no matter what you put in the landfill, once the air doesn't get to it, most of it can still be there in 1,000 years anyway. I think you have to get at the polluters. I mean, people who are throwing trash on the ground. I mean, I think if we're responsible with our trash, then it's not a problem. It's the people who aren't responsible with their trash that are causing the problem. So like I said, very few people that I know are single-use plastic. What about things you buy in a cereal box? It's kind of plastic, it's kind of waxy, but what are they going to do with that? Where's it going to impact? Where's the single use when you buy a bag of sandwich bags? Are you going to tax that exorbitantly, or are you not going to be able to buy them? Where does the single use plastic end and begin?
Senator Rogers?
This is my last answer, and I'm going to have to bug out shortly. So it's just referring to single-use plastic straws and the little light-duty bags that your milk breaks through halfway to the car that you get at the stores. And it's pretty easy, and most of us have adapted by now, to buy reusable heavy-duty bags. You bring them in with you. You can actually put 10 times the amount of stuff in them and carry it all the way to the car without the milk falling on the ground. What's happening, I'm the same as you, Janine. We've actually got this little fabric sleeve that when we get home with them, we stuff them in them. And they're actually very handy to have some around, and we reuse them, and when we're done with them, our recycling center takes them, so we recycle. Unfortunately, not everybody's that responsible, and I made that point in committee, that, you know, if everybody handled them like we do, it wouldn't be a problem. Because of their light nature, people who don't take care of them, they blow around, they end up in streams, they break down, they lead to those microplastics. And the very manufacturing of them is extremely toxic. And so it's just something that we never used to have. Not that many years ago they came out. So we know that we can do without them. And we've got to figure out ways to reduce the number of plastics. So it doesn't go to sandwich bags. It's just those single-use, light-duty shopping bags, and the straws and the styrofoam containers for now. I'm sure in the future there's going to be more discussion. I think one of the things that needs to be addressed is to put pressure on manufacturers to package stuff differently. Sometimes you get the tiny little flashlight and it comes in 4 pounds of plastic that takes you an hour to break into to get the darn thing out. And I think that kind of packaging needs to be addressed, because that's also ending up in our landfill. Thank you all. I'm headed out.
Hey, John. Thank you, John. You'll still be able to get a paper bag, won't you?
Yeah, you have to pay for it, though, I think. Sam, I have awful.
Senate bill, I guess, honestly, I guess if I can still get a paper bag, I'm not too worried about it. You know, it's like I hadn't really thought about it too much. The paper straws are a thing now, and those seem to work just fine. You know, I did listen to a thing on, Bacardi has gotten on this campaign of trying to get rid of the single-use plastic straws, because they're all over the, you know, kind of in the ocean and stuff, and all the breaking down. But the campaign is called "The Future Doesn't Suck."
I also haven't seen the bill. I can understand, you know, the pressure and the concept to try to keep these plastic bags and straws or whatever it is from showing up in the environment. But I agree with you. It's not the it's not the bag that got there on its own. It's the irresponsibility of the people who use them. You know, I think folks are moving towards the cloth bags to bring in. I know I even do it. The biggest problem I have is remembering to go in and with them while I'm in there. So I have a concern. I think there's a provision in there for, if you want a straw, you can ask for a straw and get one. I know there are a lot of folks with disabilities that appreciate a straw. So I'm hoping that piece is in there. I don't know about the price for paper bags or whatever yet, but I'm not sure. But again, I just think it's coming around as it is, and I'm not sure I'm willing to put another Band-Aid out there.
Next question or comment? Mr. Peter.
Attorney Peter Swinesburg. I've been hearing a lot about helping the farmers, helping the loggers and everything, and keeping business here. But then the next article I read, new mandates. Well, if you want business, there's a certain amount of mandates that aren't going to help you keep that business or have it move. They talk about 2,500 foot used to be elevation cut. You had to have a permit over that. Now they want to go down to 1,500 feet. And now it's going to entail that, it's under the Farm Bill and under the Logging Bill, and then the Agency of Natural Resources and Department of Agriculture standards for wetlands, they can't agree. Well, I worked for the state for 35 years, and I can tell you one thing. It's always been the right hand and not know what the left hand is doing. That makes complications for everybody. I'll go with the logging. I've been having a chance right around this winter, look at some of these logging operations. Big operations. Very few small operations anymore. Same as farming. Slowly but surely being pushed up by regulations. The only ones that can afford the regulations are the big ones. And every time somebody's bigger, There's always somebody bigger than that. It's like being rich. There's always somebody richer than you. The state then they make these regulations, they don't ask people who are doing the job about it. They don't get them involved. In the wood industry right now, you got loggers that go in there and they cut one species as a rule sometimes, but that's what they like, or that's what they have demand for. When they take on that cutting job, there's always some other species that they're not interested in, but they have to cut it. Instead of being able to break it down and have two cutters go in there, maybe a big-time cutter and a small-time cutter that produces a smaller amount, but works with that species that would go through the chipper and be gone, where you could produce something and have money out of it for either the big-time operator and the small-time operator, your woods would look a lot better. And every time you turn around, there's a fine on something. Well, you can't have people trying to do a business be fined for everything if the people who are running it don't know what a wetland is, they don't know what tree species they're working with, and they won't ask anybody that does that job every single day about it, because for some reason they think the person that's doing it don't know anything. Well, some of these people have been doing this for 30, 40 years. I think they know a little bit about it. They're not getting enough people involved at the ground level. I just know of a job that was done, the people that were cutting it, big-time operators, the wood that went through the chipper was thousands and thousands of dollars that could have been put back into the economy and put two small workers to work. Either the state or the foresters have got to help these two loggers, the big ones and the little ones, work together. If the big logger had a chance to let the little logger go in and take out what he needs, that he can use, that he can produce, and help the economy, and then have the big logger take out what he wants, and they can work together. Don't make them enemies. Make them work together, let them work together, help them work together. So when you get done, you got more money coming out of that parcel of land. The people who look doing it, the looks are going to look a lot better. And I think it'd be a lot easier and a lot happier for the people who are producing it than it is with all these rules and regulations.
Sam?
I think I'd just say that, so in the House this year, we had 7 new committee chairs, and half of all of the committees had brand new chairs. And the Natural Resources Committee, the woman who's chaired the Natural Resources Committee she'd been on this Act 250 commission for the last couple of years, looking about how to reform Act 250, but she just kind of plowed ahead and didn't actually try and bring her committee along with her. And so the stuff about elevation and they didn't get a bill out. So and we're at crossover, so it's time's up. So at least for this year, the changes around Act 250, which I was kind of monitoring closely, did not make it out of committee and just kind of had a committee meltdown / rebellion. So I don't know. That was kind of how that one went. You can look at that as a positive. They didn't get those regulations out, or at least they need a lot more time for consideration. That's where that one ended up.
Mark?
I agree with Sam on that. The new chair of Fish, Wildlife, and Natural Resources, she was the chair of the Act 250 Commission. We went around the state last year and had a number of public hearings. I went to the one in Island Pond, a real concern for me. Prior to that, I talked to a lot of different businesses that had gone through the Act 250 process and asked them their concerns. I had a list all prepared as to what I was going to say, representing those folks. The commission hearings were a sham. There was over 100 people at the Island Pond one. Everybody was ready to speak, which is my understanding of what a public hearing is for. But they had it set up so you had facilitators at each table, and there was probably 8 members of the community that acted with a facilitator. You had flashcards, and those flashcards were everything. You were supposed to prioritize what you thought was the most important in Vermont for Act 50, whether it's the environment, whether it's jobs, whether it's, you went right down the list. Some of the people, as you can imagine, up in that neck of the woods weren't too comfortable with that, did try to speak out, but were pretty much cut off and said that they could present their testimony written. Again, just to give you an example of one of the issues in the North Hyde Park Industrial Park, there was a fellow who was trying to get his kiln-dried firewood operation off the ground. Paid $69,000 for a 1 acre lot. Now that industrial park has already been permitted, so it's already had Agency of Natural Resources in there for water quality issues and everything. He had to go through another water quality study that would have cost him $10,000, but he went with the same engineer, so it only cost him $2,000. It was a part-time gig with one other guy. He was looking to start the project off reasonable with maybe a porta potty and just another structure for keeping them out of the weather. Well, that wasn't allowed. Had to build a building with a bathroom. So in other words, I think his initial cost there was around $60,000. And his concern again is he'd like to buy the acre lot next to him if and when he expands, and is he going to have to go through the same thing? So again, there was a lot of concern on my part. That's just one example of many examples of what's going on. It was an opportunity, if you ask me, to make some very needed changes to Act 250 to make it not so burdensome. Some of the other things that I heard were extortion from Agency of Natural Resources, downright disrespect for a lot of these developers that are looking to create a business in Vermont. So again, I think, as Sam said, it didn't meet crossover. I've been talking with another example. I don't know if you're familiar, but the Agriculture and Forestry Committee, which I was on last year for 2 years, was an 11-member committee. The Speaker cut that committee down to an 8-member committee and moved a couple of us that have agriculture and forestry experience onto other committees. I ended up on Energy and Technology. Harvey Smith, another beef farmer from Madison County area, ended up on Fish, Wildlife, and Water Resources. I asked the Speaker about that after the fact. I wasn't advised in advance. And if what she says is the case, I can understand, hoping that there's very little knowledge of ag and forestry out there now in the legislature, and to spread that knowledge to some of these other committees where it could be important. I just worry that it dilutes the Ag Committee and Forestry Committee, as well as I myself and Harvey feel that we're really only one voice on that committee, on those committees. How much folks would listen is another story, but that's a concern as well. But I'm sure it will be taken up next year and continue. Not sure where it'll go. I know that the Commissioner of Forest Parks and Recreation, Mike Schneider, that I've talked to quite often, has had some real good folks come in and testify, especially on the logging end of things. I believe even the Agency of Natural Resources, some of the other people in there, have come in and talked about how they don't believe that a lot of that the forestry pieces in there are going to help the industry at all. So they're also testifying against it. So it all depends on what happens down the road, but I think people like yourself or others that have concerning testimony should try to get in and testify down there. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a little less than 5 minutes left, so does somebody have a relatively short question or comment to make? So everyone just has long comments to make? Somebody must have something. Yes. Jack.
Joe Greenwood from Derby again. I just wanted one more item on that S37. Senator Rogers had a good point about the sludge and the leachate coming off the Casella waste dump going into our sewage system. And I agree with him 100%. But who's responsible for the cost of testing? Is Casella responsible for that? You know, that's what the burden you're putting on the business after the fact. You know, should we, the taxpayers, pay for all the testing, or should they? Don't make the company responsible for it after the fact, after you've let him take in all the rubbish for the last 20 years. That's just my comment.
Sam?
I think we almost got through this entire meeting without talking about leaching. I mean, you know, in the end, when it comes to the dump, I'd say it's gonna be all of our responsibility to deal with the cleanup, and that's the truth of the matter. And for all of our future waste too. So that's, you know, comes down to, you know, what we're thinking about with whatever, you know, just all of the waste that we're producing and how we can reduce it. But in terms of, you know, the dump, it's, you know, I think, because you brought it up, that, you know, I can't believe that that is a good site in any way, and that we really need to investigate what, like, geologically is I mean, we're gonna need a landfill, but like, where geologically does it make sense to have it, I think is an important investigation that the legislature needs to have, and not just go with the existing approval process that exists.
And Mark?
Well, I signed on with Mike Marcotte and others, I believe, mainly just maybe the Northeast Kingdom representatives, but a bill to have the Agency of Natural Resources the possibility of a new site in Vermont. I mean, I attended the meeting over here a few months back regarding the landfill. There was a lot of interesting conversation, a lot of things that I know would never happen. Some folks were talking about there should be a landfill in every county. It's not going to happen. I know I was on the Windham County Solid Waste Management District at the Brattleboro landfill, and that landfill was right along the Connecticut River. So it amazes me that I think a lot of times these sites are along a waterway for whatever reason. It's going to be hard to site and get another town to sign on to a landfill, but like I say, there is a bill out there now to do exactly that, and I hope it's considered.
Thank you. And that brings us to a conclusion of this morning's legislative breakfast. I'd like to thank Senator Rogers, Representative Young and Higley, the East Side Restaurant, and the members of the media, and most importantly, you, the members of the public, who brave to venture out this nice, warm, spring almost day. Our next legislative breakfast will be held here on April 8th. Our guests are scheduled to be Senator Bobby Starr and Representatives Mike Marcotte and Paul Lefebvre. Thank you all for attending.